Hello everyone, my name is Minko Gechev. I am the Product and Developer Relations Lead for Angular at Google. Today I'll share with you more about what the community has been calling the Angular Renaissance. Angular has been going through a lot of innovation lately, and we have been keeping the momentum going for over 2 years now. In the next 20 minutes I'll share more about it, but in short, what the Angular Renaissance means is that we have been shipping a lot of features. We ship deferrable views that allow you to declaratively lazy load code. We delivered a new control flow syntax that is significantly more intuitive and faster. We worked with the Google Material team to define what Material 3 means for the web and delivered Angular Material 3. And together with this, we also made a lot of progress in simplifying Angular's reactivity story with signals. And so much more. We shipped a lot of new features across the Angular CLI, Angular DevTools, components, documentation, and the list just goes on and on. Everything we're shipping is in a service of our mission. We help developers to deliver web apps with confidence. And we're doing that by making it easier to build faster apps. We're doing that by also giving you the tools to build applications faster. And also we're really focused on stability and reliability. As some of you may know, the team has spent a lot of time working on signals. It was just less than a year ago when we published the Angular Signals RFC. We got an incredible community response with over 1,000 comments, so clearly there was a lot of interest around signals. But it turned out there was more interest than we originally anticipated. Google has another web framework named Wiz. Wiz is not open source, it is internal for Google. It is also very tightly coupled to Google's internal infrastructure. It is also very different compared to what popular open source projects use. We don't have Vite and Webpack and TSBuild. Internally we're using something called Blaze. Bazel is the closest open source alternative to it. Wiz is hyper-focused on performance above everything else, and this is why many Google flagship consumer products are using Wiz, such as Google Search, Google Chats, Google Meet, Google Photos, Google Play, and so on. Google and Wiz, they both have existed in some form or another in the past about 10 years. And at the beginning, the types of UIs that developers would build with them were very different. Wiz applications tended to be more consumer-focused, especially for products that are extremely latency sensitive. Think Google Search. And Angular applications on the other side, they were very highly interactive. They overlap a lot with what you would think about being like an enterprise UI. Over time though, the lines between these two, they started to blur. Google developers working with Wiz wanted more of the features of Angular. And Google developers working with Angular wanted more of the features of Wiz. Also, not only Googlers, external developers too. It became clear that these two different frameworks were converging on a lot of the same ideas. So people at Google asked us, why are we duplicating so much work? Why are we building the same features for both frameworks? That's how Angular and Wiz started working closer together. In fact, we recently announced that both teams are teaming up with combined hundreds of years of experience in building web frameworks to open source the best of Wiz via Angular and bring Angular strengths to Google's consumer products. That's how Wiz adopted Angular Signals. And today, Angular Signals primitives are in production for 100% of YouTube's mobile web traffic. YouTube supports 3 main platforms today, and they have several applications for each one of them. They have Living Room, which runs on your smart TVs. They also have a very full-featured mobile application. And together with this, there is the flagship desktop application, desktop site on youtube.com. Each of these platforms handles rendering slightly differently today. Living Room and mobile web, for example, they're based on some kind of like a virtual DOM implementation. That's what they're using for rendering. And it has unique constraints and challenges. So YouTube, they wanted to try to unify on the rendering model by using signals and see whether they will be able to achieve their performance goals in a practical way. After switching to Angular Signals, YouTube saw a 35% improvement to their interaction latency on smart TVs when navigating across titles. YouTube's video player controls on mobile are now smooth with 60 frames per second using Angular Signals from the jittery 25 frames per second with Virtual DOM. And on Shorts, they also achieved 60 frames per second and lower interaction latency during swiping. With most major web frameworks adopting Signals, there is now an initiative to bring them to the JavaScript language. As a couple of weeks ago, Signals are now at stage 1 in TIS39, and the reference implementation for Signal in fact uses Angular, because Angular Signals proved that they're efficient, running at scale in the second biggest website in the world, being YouTube. And additionally, Angular Signals are now currently used in multiple frameworks, Angular and Wiz, which means that they're likely going to be able to serve well other frameworks. All right, so when talking about Signals, people often assume that we aim to replace RxJS with them. The truth is that RxJS and Signals, they solve pretty different problems. Signals are great for managing the state of your components, and RxJS is great in handling an async stream of messages. For example, messages over WebSockets. In fact, we worked on a set of interop APIs to make sure that RxJS and Signals work well together. So if you're using Angular, you can make sure that, please make sure that you check these interop APIs at angular/core/RxJS-interop. All right, so enough about Signals. Now let me share with you how Signals inspired us to develop a new control flow syntax. So we were running user studies with developers trying to evaluate the ergonomics of the signal-based APIs. We had folks with a variety of different levels of experience and also different frameworks. For example, we had Angular developers, React developers, Vue, Svelte, and so on. So we were watching them build an application with Angular, and we noticed that all of them really struggled with the template syntax. Especially, they were struggling iterating over a collection of items. Everyone had to look up the syntax for ng4, and many of the people who were not Angular developers, they couldn't even complete the assignment because the control flow was so complicated. So we explored the space, and we proposed a new control flow syntax in an RFC. We received an overwhelming amount of feedback, really. Like, people like talking about syntax and commenting about syntax, and there were a lot of great suggestions. One of the proposals was an alternative for a different control flow syntax using an @ sign at the beginning. So we considered it, in fact, because it received a lot of positive feedback as well, the specific community proposal. We also added it to our developer survey, and we had over 12,000 respondents in there. People overall agreed that the community proposed syntax was the better alternative, so we ended up implementing it. This is how it looks like. We're really happy with it because it looks significantly simpler, it is significantly closer to JavaScript, and also enables a really nice type narrowing, pretty much what TypeScript would offer for the alternative JavaScript syntax. On top of that, we also played a little bit with the diffing algorithm under the hood, and we improved some benchmarks with over 90%. It also positioned us really well in the relevant JS framework benchmarks. So you can look them up at Google/JS benchmarks. We also saw some surprising results. So for every major feature, we're collaborating with partners. After Build.com started using the new Angular control flow syntax, they saw 1 second improvement in their Largest Contentful Paint. What I love the most about this control flow syntax, though, is that if you're using the current one with ng4, you can very easily move to the latest one just by using the Angular CLI. Just run ng-generate at Angular/core:control flow, and this will automatically refactor your existing projects to be using the new control flow syntax. Now, we touched a little bit on performance around the control flow syntax, but it was really not a major focus of us. We mostly wanted to improve the developer experience by re-implementing this control flow syntax and making it more intuitive. Now I'm going to cover a couple of other performance improvements that we focused on, and particularly I'll focus on hybrid rendering. First, a couple of months ago we shipped deferrable views. They allow you to extract part of your templates and load them on demand. So among these amazing features we shipped, this is probably my favorite, because it allows you to just wrap part of your template in a deferred block, and from there the Angular CLI does all the magic. It handles all the complexity with loading states, intersection observers, and so much more. In fact, let me show you in this live demo here. All right, now let us quickly look at the demo. Here we have a very simple application, just one chat box. We can type some messages in and they're just going to be listed. But we can imagine that this is part of a way complicated UI. On the blank spot here, we can have an e-commerce platform with a bunch of products listed. And the chat box could be just a chat box that we use to engage with the support. And maybe 1% of the time we would like to do that. Maybe 1% of the time we would have a message to send to the support. However, if we open Chrome DevTools and we look at the network tab, we're going to see that in the main bundle, we have the chat box component, which seems redundant. If we're going to use it, if the users are going to engage with it 1% of the time, why load it at the beginning? Why not delay its loading so that we can speed up our application's load time? Now, a lot of technologies allow us to use lazy loading, to lazily load some code, but all of them require us to handle different loading states. Or if we would like to download something on demand, let's say when a placeholder enters the viewport, we have to use intersection observers, and their API is definitely not trivial. So something that we can use in Angular now is called deferrable views. And deferrable views provide this defer block where we would like to where we can specify that when a specific placeholder enters the viewport, and this placeholder could be just the span element, we would like to download the chat box and render it. And that's all. It manages all the complexity of loading states and interaction with intersection observers automatically for us. Now, if we go to the UI again, and if we refresh, we're going to see that in the main bundle, we no longer have the chat box component. However, if we engage with the chat box component and it enters the viewport, Angular automatically downloads it for us and renders it onto the screen. This manages all the complexity for us, including loading states and intersection observers. And you can achieve that in a very declarative way, just by adding a couple of lines of code. Build.com, in fact, uses deferrable views in production right now. They managed to reduce the bundle size in one of their applications with up to 50% just by wrapping part of their template in a defer block. Talking about performance, one of the most important techniques to optimize for largest contentful paint is using hybrid rendering. With hybrid rendering, we refer to the rendering mechanism of applications that use a mixture between server-side rendering, pre-rendering, and client-side rendering. For example, Virgin Media, O2, they saw 72% reduction of their largest contentful paint after switching to Angular's hybrid rendering. And in version 17, we replaced entirely the internals of the Angular CLI to use Vite and ESBuild in order to speed up the hybrid rendering's build times. After switching to the new build pipeline, Vanguard saw 3 times faster production builds for one of their applications. In fact, we made ESBuild the default in version 17, and you can migrate your existing applications using the Angular CLI. Or alternatively, you can just go to your angular.json and update your builder there manually. All right, so when we talk about hybrid rendering, there is one thing that is essential part of SSG and SSR, or pre-rendering in SSR, and this is hydration. Hydration is a core part of hybrid rendering, and I'm sure that many of you using hybrid rendering have encountered these hydration errors when your server rendered document doesn't really match what the client is expecting. To help you deal with this, we've got a new feature in Angular DevTools browser extension that allows you to help to identify and debug these kind of mismatches. But there is one more problem with hydration. Most frameworks implement something called full app hydration. So when your server renders your application, the browser fetches the HTML from the server. After that, the browser downloads all the reference JavaScript. As the next step, it needs to execute the JavaScript. And by this point, the application still looks frozen to the user. It's simply not interactive because we don't have the JavaScript event listener set up yet. Once the JavaScript executes, it will add the event listeners, and finally your application is going to become interactive. You can see that this could be a pretty long period of time, especially if you're loading a lot of JavaScript out there. But remember the collaboration with the Wiz team that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Also, as a reminder, Wiz is laser focused on performance and offers an improvement on top of full app hydration. At the beginning, when you're using this improvement on top of full app hydration, everything looks the same. The browser sends a request to the server and receives the HTML for the page. Here though, we don't load any of the reference scripts which contain the framework and the application logic. We just have a very thin event delegation layer, and when the user starts interacting with the application and the events bubble up, the event delegation library handles the event at the top level at the body, finding the identifier for this event target for the specific button that the user clicked. This identifier is associated with a script that is responsible for handling this event. At this point, we download only the minimum amount of JavaScript and hydrate only a subset of the component tree that is responsible for handling this user interaction. This technique is called partial hydration, and you can benefit from having a significantly smaller JavaScript bundle, plus improved total blocking time and better core web vital metrics. Partial hydration is coming to Angular in the next couple of weeks, so make sure you stay tuned and you follow us on twitter.com/Angular for the latest updates. All right, so with all this innovation happening in Angular lately, we have been also seeing a lot of advancements in the community. I would like to congratulate Brandon Roberts on his 1.0 release of Analog.js, which is a community-driven meta framework for Angular. Another piece of community work I'm really excited about is the 10-stack Angular support. Big thanks to Chow, Arnold, and Corbin for bringing 10-stack store, query, and forms support to the Angular ecosystem. All right, so with all these cool things, you might notice this logo and think, oh wow, it looks so 2010 or so, back from the HTML5 days. And you'll be right. We had this logo in one form or another for over 10 years now. At a certain point around 2016, we removed the border, but the logo has been pretty much the same, and it hasn't been reflecting the future-looking nature that Angular has nowadays. So back in November last year, we did a brand refresh, and this is the new logo, which is part of a bigger revamp. We additionally re-implemented our documentation, which is now available at angular.dev. It has a brand new learning journey that is based on StackBlitz's web containers, and you can give Angular a try immediately today in your browser in just a matter of seconds. So make sure you give these latest improvements a try and let us know what you think. Now, what's coming up next? I already mentioned partial hydration. But together with this, we're also working on a bunch of other things. Improving of Angular's change detection, moving it away from Zone.js. Working on better edit refresh time. Working on streaming with server-side rendering. Expanding our accessibility primitives. Improving our authoring formats, and so on and so forth. All of the features that we're building, though, they're focused on enabling you to build faster applications easier, while keeping really high emphasis on stability and reliability. Well, that's everything I had for you today. Thank you very much for listening to my talk, and I would love to answer your questions.